I'd like to continue now with five what we call People Magazine-ish type questions. And the first one asks, what is your favorite food?
I like to say seafood, all the food I see.
Oh, okay.
No, I really love seafood though, fish and as far as desserts, I would think cherry pie or ice cream. I like all kinds of food.
Okay. And do you have a favorite time of year?
Spring and summer,
All right. How about a favorite color?
probably green if I had to choose.
Okay. Do you have a favorite vacation destination?
Jamaica,
Right. And how,
Negril specifically.
all right. How about a favorite phrase or saying? Do you have one of those?
I have several. If I could think of one. If everyone does a little, all of us can have a lot.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, this section of the interview focuses on your family background. And first, I'd like to ask if you would please tell us about your mother. What was her name and where was she born?
My mother's name was Verlene Klingman, well, Greene at the time. She was born in Salem, Virginia, and left there at a very young age and moved to the Beckley, West Virginia area. Lived in a small town called Helen, West Virginia, which is not even there anymore. It's a coal mining town, and they called it the Hollow, one of the hollows that they lived in. And she grew up there with her uncles and grandmother and siblings in that coal mining town.
Okay. So, was there a very large extended family there?
Yes, yes, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, mother, father, the whole deal. Back then, coal mining was the occupation that if you wanted to make a living, that was it in West Virginia. And all of the people lived in this one small town, of course working for the mine and dealing with the company's store and living in the company's houses and the whole ball of wax.
Did your mother ever tell you any stories about growing up in West Virginia?
Oh yes, a lot of stories. One that sticks out in my mind is that even though they lived in Helen, West Virginia, kind of a remote place, about, my guess would be about 20, 25 miles south of, I think south of Beckley. Uh, Quite interestingly, bands and orchestras used to come through there and play at this big music house or banquet hall that they had there. And she told me that she saw Cab Calloway, I think she said Ella Fitzgerald came through once, Fats Waller, and people like that. So she had a pretty interesting childhood in that regard. And she also had a very close relationship with her uncles, who I'm told spoiled her and gave her pretty much everything she wanted. She was the oldest of her siblings, and she had a good relationship with her uncles.
Now, did your mother have a lot of brothers and sisters?
She had two brothers. One died well, he was young, I think 5, 6 years old, and three sisters. So there were 5 of them. My uncle, that's still alive, his name is James Greene, and her 3 sisters, 2 of whom have died, Arlene and Rometta. Rometta lived in Cleveland when she died, and Arlene lived in Los Angeles. And her youngest sister, Lois, is still alive. She lives in Richmond, Virginia.
And so all of them then are coming of age in that coal mining town
Yes.
in West Virginia.
Yes, except for my uncle. He said he wasn't about to work in the coal mine, so he left at an early age to join the Army. Because he just was afraid. He said he was afraid to work in the coal mines, because my great-grandfather had his leg cut off working in coal mine. A car ran over his leg, and he had a peg leg. So my uncle was deathly afraid of going into the coal mine, so he said he left. He got out of Beckley and went into the Army.
Okay. Now, did your mother attend the public schools in West
Yes,
Virginia?
yes. Graduated from a high school that is still having its reunions. The name of the high school is Bird Prillerman. And I understand historically Mr. or Dr. Prillerman ended up being the president of West Virginia State University and Institute, West Virginia. It has a significant history, that high school does. And they still have reunions. My uncle still goes to their reunions. There are only a few of them left, but the school's not there, but they still have their reunions.
So is that a historically black institution?
Yes, it's a high school, and of course it was primarily black.
Okay.
Back in those days, you know, it was segregation and all black.
Okay. Was that true of the demography of the town as well, or was there a racially mixed population and just segregation in the school?
Yes, it was basically separated by the haves and have-nots. For what I remember going down there, there were whites who lived there as well in the hollow, but they worked for the mines, and everybody was, you know, on the same level. But of course, in the education system, it was different. But from what I remember, the community was a mixed community.
Okay. Do you remember your maternal grandparents?
Yes, yes. My grandmother's name was Mabel, and grandfather's name was Charles. They lived in Beckley, and I remember going down to their house in the summertime, and I remember all the chickens running around the yard and how we would have chicken even for breakfast, you know, and how my grandfather used to pray these long prayers before we could eat. I'm sitting there, when is he going to get finished, you know, ready to eat? And my grandmother, I'm told by my mother, was very, what can I say? She was special, especially in her relationship with us as children, as her grandchildren. Unfortunately, she died at a young age, about 48 years old, in West Virginia around 1953. So I didn't spend a lot of time with her, but we used to go down in the summers. I remember at least 2 or 3 summers we went down to spend with them. So it was a good time. Mm-hmm. They had their own home, a lot of land, and this was in the early 50s.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say you used to go down, was that for a family vacation, or would you spend the entire summer?
My brother and I would go down, my oldest brother would go down and spend the summer in West Virginia and in North Carolina sometimes with my father's parents.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were on the farm in the summer, did that mean you became a farmer for the season, or how did it
I
work?
guess you could call it that. I used to pick apples and plums off the trees, used to feed the hogs that my grandfather had on my father's side, feed the chickens, go in the chicken coop and get the eggs, collect the eggs. I did whatever they asked me to do, chop wood, go to a well and draw the water out of the well. So I did a lot of things, yeah.
So it sounds like both of your parents then came from rural backgrounds?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Or small town at
yes,
least.
Right,
Urban
right,
communities.
right.
All right. What was your father's name?
James. He was the oldest of 8 and born in Clemens, North Carolina, small town again, outside of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And his father and mother, of course, had a farm as well, and we would stay there sometimes in the summer. His father grew peanuts. He had a smokehouse. He had the well. He had the chickens and the hogs and the cow. And, you know, it was and fruit trees, and it was just a country experience.
Mm-hmm. And you said your father's the oldest of 8?
There were 8, yes.
Okay.
There were 4 boys and 4 girls. Mm-hmm. One of the brothers died at an early age, but the rest of them lived to be quite up there. Matter of fact, one of his sisters is still living. She's 96 years old. And the rest of them died like 95, 93. They lived to be at least in their 90s.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said you were able to spend a substantial amount of time with your grandparents in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember their names?
Yes.
Okay.
Will was my grandfather. William, they called him Will. And my grandmother's name was Sarah. And we would go down in the summer to spend time with them. They would leave us there. My mother and father would take us down and leave us there for a couple of months. And it was quite an experience to grow up and to remember now, look back now and to see how they lived with the coal, the stove that you had to put the wood in and to cook the food and take the bath in the tub on Saturday night, and the lanterns and the well where you had to get the water, and of course the outhouse that you had to go outside to use the bathroom. I mean, it was I experienced that, and I thought it was fun. My brother didn't like it too much, but I thought it was a lot of fun.
Well, Mr. Klingman, for the students of history who view this video, they may not know
Oh, okay.
about those
Yeah,
those
what an outhouse
innovations.
is.
Yeah. So, I mean, how much detail would you like to share? Since this is your story, do we need to go into details so students will know
Well,
what an outhouse was
yeah.
for?
An outhouse was a bathroom. Well, it wasn't a bathroom. It was just it was a toilet, and it was nothing but a hole in the ground, but you know, the seat and everything where you had to go, and that's where you had to go. Of course, at night they would have this container that they would bring into the house if you had to relieve yourself, if you didn't want to go outside. And that's basically what it was. No flusher, no anything, you know. And every now and then they would come and put lime. I think they would put lime in it to keep it functional. The other thing, the smokehouse. People may not know what that was, but my grandfather had a smokehouse. He would kill hogs, and in order to preserve the meat, they'd pack it in salt and to preserve it, and then they'd hang it in the smokehouse and leave it there. I don't know how long he left it there, but I remember going in there and see these hams hanging up, and apparently that cured it, and you know, it was country ham then. So they were very innovative. Of course, people had to be back then. They didn't have the refrigeration, they didn't have the electricity and things like that, and the running water. So there was a lot of innovation going on back then. I remember my father telling me once about when he was chopping wood and he cut his toe. And he went in the house and toe was bleeding and I mean, split open. And his mother, my grandmother, put spider webs on it, cobwebs on it. I said, what? He said, yeah, she reached around and grabbed, you know, and put it in there. And when I got older and I took biology, that made sense, because I learned that the blood clots like a web. And how would they have known that? I don't know. But he said that's what she would do. They were very, very smart back then, you know, a lot smarter probably than we are today.
Now, Mr. Klingman, you've described, with a smile on your face, experiences in the rural South in the absence of electricity and indoor plumbing that I take it were very pleasant for you in the middle of the 20th century.
Yes, like I said, I thought it was fun because I grew up in Cincinnati, and of course we had all those things, and so it was kind of, well, it was a different experience, and it was fun to me to be in a place where you had to use all those other kinds of things, the stove, the wood, go outside, chop the wood, bring it in to cook, and the ice cream. We used to make ice cream on the porch with my grandmother, and she would cut up the fruit, and we'd sometimes have bananas and sometimes have pineapples, and make our own ice cream with the churn, you know, the thing you had to turn with the ice and the salt on it and all that. So it was fun for me. Yeah.
Now, I'm wondering then if life in the South was, if not easy, at least pleasant, or a lot of the times, why your parents chose to migrate north. Did they ever share those stories with you?
Well, my father left home when he was 19 years old. I think he said about 18 or 19 years old. And he just wanted to get away. And he moved to Cincinnati to stay with one of his uncles who lived here. And he never went back home. He was the oldest, like I said, and I guess he just felt like he wanted to just get away. And he had an uncle living somewhere, so he struck out on his own and stayed here since that time. My mother met my father. It was really a strange relationship, because my father's sister married my mother's uncle, and they got married before my parents did, and they introduced my mother and father, took him down to West Virginia, because my mother's uncle obviously was from Beckley, and they took my father on a vacation with them down there, and that's where he met my mother.
Okay. All right. So when did the family actually establish a permanent home in Ohio, your parents?
I think they moved here in 1943. 1943.
Okay. So that's just before you were born?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And did they ever say what it was about Cincinnati that really attracted them? And you know, this
Well,
is
it was a big city.
Okay.
It was the big city. I remember my father telling me about how he used to take my mother he wanted to take her on a date, and he couldn't wait to take her down to the train station. I don't know if you know anything about Cincinnati, but Union Terminal is a famous train station. And he told me about the first time he took her down there. I was driving him around one day. It was later in his life, and he was telling me some things. He said, yeah, I took her out, and we went down here to the train station. I said, to the train station? So that was his date, you know.
Right.
But back then, the train station had a lot of activity, had a lot of things to do there. And you just watch people, and I remember they had some arcade games in there as well. So I guess that was a big date for them. And, but it was just a big city. He, of course, had to find work, and he worked at a dry cleaners, a huge dry cleaners. I remember as a night watchman when we were growing up, and just did whatever he had to do to, you know, take care of his family. And I remember her telling me back then that he made $35 a week. And there were 4 of us at that time, 4 siblings. And my great-grandmother lived with us. She lived with us until she died.
Okay. So what are some of the earliest memories that you have then of growing up in Cincinnati with the other siblings in the household?
Well, people may find this different being in Cincinnati, but there were 5 of us. 4 of us were born at home, right in where we lived. And my great-grandmother, who's my mother's grandmother, had a hand in delivering myself and my older brother. And I remember when my second youngest brother was born. I remember seeing my mother in the bed and them handing the baby to her. And I thought the doctor brought the baby in and gave it to her. But I remember seeing that, he laying there with her. And I was about 5 years old at that time. But those are, you know, memories that stand out because I think, well, I know that it provided a closeness, a family closeness in that regard. And but we were primarily raised by our great-grandmother. She died at age 92 in 1972. But she lived with us and took care of us while my mother and father worked. And I remember my older brother and I would, you know, just be out in the streets playing, going places, discovering things and doing things we shouldn't do and all of that. My sister primarily stayed at home, and because there were 4 boys and 1 girl, and just did the things that kids do, you know, living in the West End of Cincinnati, which is primarily where most black people lived back then in the late 40s and early 50s. Going to school, getting into trouble, getting into little fights at school, you know, what we thought were big time things, but we were just normal, you know, just what we considered normal. Living on the block, and all the kids on the block knew each other. We knew all the families. We'd go to eat at different people's houses in the afternoon, in the evening or whatever, and we looked out for each other. We had our little arguments and spats, but it was basically a good time. I mean, we never looked at it as oh, I can't wait to get away from here and that kind of thing. I don't remember any time that we ever did that. It was just we did what we did. We had what we had, which was not much, but we didn't really have any problems when it came to money, and you know, we didn't have it, so don't miss what you didn't have, you know, what you don't have. So it was a good childhood. There were some, I think, I wouldn't call them problems, but what's another word? I don't know. The relationship that we developed with my great-grandmother, of course, caused us to be different from the way we would have been had my mother and father, you know, were just there without her, because she had a great influence on not only the children, but on the whole family. My great-grandmother did. So it was a lot of things that she brought from her thinking and her upbringing, which she was born in 1880. And
what was her name, please?
Minerva, really, but they called her Minnie Dow. And quite interestingly, her married name was Taliaferro, which is the middle name of Booker T. Washington. And she married a Taliaferro out of Virginia, which is where Booker T. came from. So I always tell people I may be related to Booker T. Washington. but her name was Minerva Dow. Her first husband died. I think he got killed by an accidental shooting, and when he was hunting or something. And then she married a Taliaferro and adopted two boys. And she and my mother were real close because my mother was the first sibling of her daughter, Mabel, and she kind of took my mother in and raised her. You know, back then they would, oh, I'll take that child, you know, that kind of thing. So
informally adopted.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
By
So
her
when my
grandmother.
mother moved here, she came with her, and stayed until she died. We all lived together. She lived in my mother's father's house until she died.
Yeah. And you said your great grandmother was a midwife?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Was
yeah.
any formal training for
No,
that, or just
not that
other women
no,
in the community?
just there. Yeah.
Okay.
We have a cousin, my mother's sister, Lois, had her first child in West Virginia. And I remember them telling me about this, that of course at home, baby was born. He was real small. I mean, premature, and they said you could hold him right in the palm of your hand. You put a handkerchief on him for a diaper, that kind of thing. And the doctor told her he's not going to make it. You may as well just put him over there and just let him, you know, go to sleep and die. Right now, he lives in Beckley, West Virginia, and he's my age. He's about a year younger than I am. He's a retired fire chief of Beckley, West Virginia. And my great grandmother told the doctor when he was born, when the doctor told her there's no hope, she said, "Now give me that baby." And she took care of him, nursed him, and like I said, the rest is he's still living, you know. So that's the kind of, I think, I don't know, intuitive intelligence, raw knowledge about life that our ancestors and elders had, that we should appreciate.